It was an abandoned building on the edge of town, hidden behind a dense row of trees. The kind of place teenagers dared each other to visit on dark, quiet nights. Most kids had heard the story, but few were brave enough to see it for themselves. The rumor was simple: inside the building was a room lined with mirrors. If you went inside and stood in the center at midnight, you would see something you weren't meant to see. The legend claimed that people who saw their reflection in the mirror room would vanish without a trace, taken by their reflection. Of course, none of us believed it. It was just a creepy story, right? But when Ben dared me to go with him one Friday night, I couldn't say no. After all, it was just a room. What could happen? We arrived at the building just after 11:30 p.m. The place was exactly as people described: crumbling walls, broken windows, and an air of decay that made it feel like time had forgotten it. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "We don't have to go inside." But Ben was determined. "Come on, it's just a stupid story. Nothing's going to happen. We'll go in, take a look, and be out before midnight." Reluctantly, we followed him through a broken window. The inside of the building was worse than the outside. The air was thick with dust, and every step we took echoed unnervingly. We wandered through the hallways until we found it, a door at the end of a long, dark corridor. It was slightly ajar, as if waiting for us. I didn't want to open it, but Ben pushed it open without hesitation. Inside was exactly what we expected: a room lined with mirrors. The room was eerie, even without the legend hanging over it. The mirrors were tall and wide, covering every wall, all facing inward, creating endless reflections that twisted and distorted as we moved. "Let's stand in the middle, like the story says," Ben suggested. His tone was casual, but I could see the nervous flicker in his eyes. We walked to the center, surrounded by reflections of ourselves in every direction. The air felt different in there, heavier, colder. My reflection stared back at me, but something was off. It didn't move exactly like I did. I turned my head slightly, and my reflection hesitated for just a fraction of a second before following. "Do you see that?" Sarah whispered. "Something's wrong with the mirrors." I felt it too. The reflections weren't just reflections. They were watching us. The old clock in the hallway began to chime. Midnight. "Okay, we've seen it. Let's go," I said, backing toward the door. But Ben didn't move. He was staring at his reflection, his face pale. "Guys, look at this," he whispered. We all turned to the mirrors, and what we saw made my blood run cold. Our reflections were no longer matching our movements. They were staring straight ahead, still and silent, as if waiting for something. Then, slowly, they began to smile. "I think we need to leave," Sarah said, her voice trembling. But the door we had come through, was gone. The room had sealed itself, the mirrors now the only thing around us. We were trapped. Panic set in. We pounded on the walls, searching for an exit, but there was nothing, just endless reflections of ourselves, mocking us with those twisted smiles. Then, Ben did something we all regretted. He lunged at one of the mirrors, smashing it with his fist. The glass shattered, but behind it was only darkness. No wall, no door, just an empty void. The other mirrors flickered, and for a moment, our reflections disappeared. But when they returned, something had changed. My reflection wasn't me anymore. It looked like me, but its eyes were darker, its smile more sinister. It took a step forward, even though I hadn't moved. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely audible. But it was too late. The reflections had begun to move on their own, closing in on us. We scrambled to the center of the room, desperate for an escape, but the reflections were everywhere, surrounding us, growing bolder with every second. Ben was the first to scream. His reflection had reached through the mirror and grabbed his arm, pulling him closer to the glass. We tried to help him, but it was as if the mirror itself had come alive, dragging him into the darkness. He vanished before our eyes, swallowed by his own reflection. Sarah was next. Her reflection reached out, mimicking her every move, but this time, it wasn't just copying. It was pulling her in. She fought, but the reflection was stronger. I watched in horror as she disappeared into the mirror, her scream echoing in the room long after she was gone. And then, it was just me. I was alone now, standing in the center of the room. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. My reflection stared back at me, grinning, but I refused to let it win. I wasn't going to let it take me like it had taken Ben and Sarah. I backed toward the shattered mirror, my eyes locked on the reflection in front of me. It mirrored my movements, but I could feel it slipping, as if it was getting weaker the closer I got to the broken glass. "You won't escape," the reflection whispered in my voice, the grin on its face widening. But I ignored it. With a desperate lunge, I reached through the broken mirror, my hands grabbing the jagged edges of the frame. The glass cut into my skin, but I didn't care. I pulled myself through, feeling the sharp pain as the shards tore at my clothes and skin. I fell onto the floor on the other side, gasping for air. Behind me, the room began to tremble, and the mirrors cracked one by one, shattering into nothingness. I scrambled to my feet and ran, never looking back. I had escaped. But as I fled the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out. Something that still had my face.